solution. Then as we move up the spectrum into the more performing class overload relays, we get into the electronic class overloads or solid state design, which I'll be talking about here coming up in the next couple slides for the E100. So at the most basic level, for those of you who might be already familiar with the older legacy E1 Plus product, the E100 is actually going to be replacing that legacy product here, which is scheduled for discontinuation this coming April 2021. Then as we continue on up the spectrum into the performance class, we see the E200, which again is a non-networked. It's actually an extension of the E300 product portfolio, if you're familiar with that. But it only offers a USB connection for that particular component, meaning there is no network that you can connect the E200 to. And then if we look at the premium offering or the architecture class overload that Rockwell offers, you have the E300, which communicates in two different protocols of either Ethernet IP or DeviceNet. And the reasoning for DeviceNet is the E300 was designated as the preferred replacement product if you're familiar with the older legacy E3 Plus overload, which went discontinued last October of 2019. So if we look at a quick overview of the feature comparisons between these overloads that I just mentioned on the previous slide, as you go from left to right, you'll see that protection, performance, and features basically increase with the product. So how you select the appropriate overload to fit the target application really depends on how high the investment is on the target application. If you're looking to protect maybe a small fan or pump that isn't very expensive, a bimetallic or an E100 would likely be the preferred solution there as a low cost, cost-effective solution. As you get into those types of infrastructures that have higher investment components and equipment, and it's going to be very costly to replace that equipment, or there's a costly downtime if that equipment fails, you may want to consider more premium protection in the form of the E200 or the E300. So again, really picking the right overload to fit the target application ultimately depends on what you're looking to protect, how high your investment is, and then those types of features and functionality you're looking to integrate within your application. So if we take a basic overview of the E100, again, as I mentioned, this is the product that's replacing the E1 Plus here coming up in April of 2021. The features and benefits that the E100 offer are very similar to that of the E1 Plus. However, there have been some enhancements and things that have been improved with the design based on some of the lessons learned and the voice of customer for the E1 Plus. So we have increased accuracy and repeatability, current measurement-based protection, the same electronic design and thermal memory, phase loss protection, which is very important when you're protecting induction motors, because once you lose a phase, that can start to do damage to the windings of that motor. You have a very rugged construction for this particular component, meaning it's got a self-powered design, which gets its power through the power bus through induction, meaning you don't need any auxiliary additional control power. You have the same wide current adjustment range of 5 to 1. And then you'll see a couple of different images here on the right where the E100 is also offered very similar to that of the E1 Plus in the direct mount offerings with Bulletin 100C and Bulletin 500 contactors, meaning you have power stabs that you can actually connect directly to those contactors, and you don't need to actually do any extra wiring, so it simplifies the installation and commissioning process. And in general, the E100 is very versatile and expandable as well, because you have optional pass-through design. So if you don't want to do any of the wiring or the direct connect, you can actually have the version that is a pass-through design where you just simply pass the wires through the openings of the overload without any termination points. Then you have adjustable trip classes and different overload reset modes, optional ground fault and jam protection. And then above 100 amps, you have the option to go for external current transformer configurations, which I'll talk about here in an upcoming slide. If we look at the two different versions of the E100, very similar to that of the E1 Plus, you have what's referred to as the basic version and the advanced version. The basic version offers, if you compare it to the E1 Plus overload relay, the basic version, used to only offer a fixed trip class of 10. Well, now the basic version of the E100 actually offers an adjustable trip class of 10 or 20. Something that we got a lot of good feedback from customers on, asking for an adjustable versus a fixed trip class. So something to keep in mind there. The basic version only offers manual reset mode, and then has a rated current range of 0.1 to 100 amps. And another thing that I like to point out here too is that previously on the E1 Plus, you had two different styles of component of overload, one that would protect in single phase mode and one that would protect in 3-phase mode. However, the E100 has now combined those features so that you can use a single product for either single phase or 3-phase. So there's not different catalogs for each of those. So really helping to simplify the portfolio in general. If we look over at the advanced version on the right, again, the same current range of 0.1 to 100 amps. And then this is the version that also offers up to 800 amps with external CT configurations. Again, the same single phase or 3-phase configuration. And then in addition to the 10 and 20 trip classes, we add 2 other additional trip classes of 15 and 30. And then the advanced version also offers a manual or automatic reset mode. Then you'll also see in the image in the top right of the screen there, there's a small expansion port there, and that we'll talk a little bit about more coming up here, but that is an expansion port for optional E100 accessories that you can also connect to further enhance the protection application for your E100 solution. As far as the base catalog information goes, very similar layout and format as compared to the E1 Plus. So you have access to the 193 or the 592 for IEC or NEMA configurations, the EE or EF for basic and advanced. You have your adjustment range in the table in the middle there of the different current ranges and the CT versions. And then the table on the right there shows the different direct mount configurations that the E100 works with in conjunction with the E100. I'm sorry, with the Bulletin 100C and Bulletin 500 contactors. And then you have optional accessories in the form of the integrated panel mount or pass-through configurations that I just mentioned on the previous slide. This is a bit of an eye chart. This is kind of just to give an overview of the E100 right now is in the launch phase right now. So there are some products of the E100 product family that aren't quite launched yet, but we are progressing through to launch these in different phases based on our availability at our Rockwell Automation Tecate manufacturing plant. So this is just to give you an idea of when these items will be launching. So I'm not going to go through and read everything, but this is just a good reference. If you want to go back and look at this at a later time, you can see what's available today and then what's available coming up in the next couple months or so. So if we take a quick look at some of the overload accessories, again, a very similar accessory offering as compared to its predecessor E1 Plus. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of these, but you have the reset adapter, the remote reset solenoid, the ERID modules, which provide remote reset and indication, anti-tamper shielding, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the unique accessories for the E100 as compared to the E1 Plus. So the reset adapter is pretty self-explanatory. It's a small plastic piece that fits over the top of the overload, which provides a larger target area for resetting the overload relay. If this is being used in, say, like an industrial control panel or an MCC that has a manual reset button on the front of the door that pushes a plunger, and then that plunger can actually hit this reset adapter versus trying to align it very specifically with the target area of a smaller button. Then we have the base unit anti-tamper shield. Again, once the overload is configured from the factory or in the field, you can install this anti-tamper shield to prevent any other inadvertent adjustments in the future of that overload so that nobody can tamper with the device settings. As far as the protection accessory, which again I'll talk about here in a little bit, also has its own anti-tamper shield so that once you have that device configured, prevents again inadvertent adjustment of the pre-configuration settings for that particular component. The remote reset solenoid is an electrical mechanical component that fits again on top of the overload so that if you wish to remotely reset the overload relay, you can use the remote reset solenoid to do this, and comes in 3 different voltages: 24 volt DC coil, 120 volts AC, and then 240 volts AC. So basically, you just apply power to this device, and that little blue button plunger on there activates and then pushes the reset button for you, either in the panel or in an MCC, so that you don't have to open the door to do so. Then you also have the DIN rail or panel adapter for the E100 specific as well, so that if you are not interested in using the pre-configured power stabs for direct connect, you can then actually use these, which provide terminals for you to connect physical wiring to the overloads instead of having it direct mount. And then this also allows you to either mount on DIN rail or panel mount it physically right to the back plane of the panel. So if we look a little bit closer at some of the more advanced accessories for the E100, we have the same 193 ERID, which is an accessory for the E1 Plus today. That's not going away. It just went through a series change where we actually changed the way that it looks cosmetically so that it kind of fits within the same portfolio of the E100 and looks like the rest of the components. Essentially what this device does is it's an electronic method to reset the overload, and then also gives you some LED indicators for the overload where you can see the status of the overload. So again, without having to open the door and get to the actual component, you can see the status of the overload using this particular component mounted on the front of the door. Then for the E100 specifically, we also added another variant of this, which just essentially removes the reset functionality. So you get the same LED indication. Some customers just may not want that reset functionality. So. Alejandro, Noel, I'm getting some really bad feedback all of a sudden.
Por favor, si pueden hacer mute de sus micrófonos. Can you please mute your microphones, please?
Thank you. That's a bit better. A little bit still going on, but anyway, I'll continue. So with the two ERID and ERID modules, that does require the 193 ERR expansion adapter that you see there in the middle there. So that component will connect to the E100 through that small expansion port. And if you look at the image on the right there, you can see that the accessory can be mounted on its side, or something new for the E100. There's actually an adapter that you can get so that you can actually mount this on top of the Bulletin 100C contactor. So very similar to that of an auxiliary contact block that you would see for the Bulletin 100C contactor. So kind of something nice there to keep in mind if you're looking to save panel space. You can now mount this thing horizontally on top of the contactor versus vertically on the side, helping to save that panel space ultimately on the DIN rail there. And then we have the Universal Protection Expansion Module, which offers ground fault and jam protection for the E100, again, connecting to that expansion port there. So again, this is very similar to the reset adapter, can be mounted in a similar fashion on its side or on the front of a Bulletin 100C contactor. So you have access to the different dip switches and rotary dials there to really configure this particular component to enhance that additional protection for your overload solution. If we look at the different documentation that's available for this, everything that I'll be talking about today is there is supporting literature on allenbradley.ab.com, or if you have access to the Rockwell Automation seismic portal, there's a number of different pieces of resource and literature there for the components as well. So the E100 has its own tech data, installation instructions, and user manual, again, all available on ab.com. If you go and search under the literature library with the E100. If you're familiar with the Proposal Works interface, the E100 has all the different available options that you just saw and the different configurations that you also just saw available today in Proposal Works. As I mentioned on ab.com, there's a dedicated website specific for the E100 where you can get additional information. You can look for certification documentation, and then also all the technical documents that you just saw on the previous slide. So one of the things I'd like to draw your attention to is, again, today the E100 already supports direct mounting with the Bulletin 100C and Bulletin 500 contactors. We are working on a project this fiscal year to also support the newer, if you're familiar with the Bulletin 100E and 300 contactors. So at the end of next year, the E100 will also offer a direct mount solution to those newer style contactors. However, if you wish to still use the E100 overload and the newer contactors, as an interim solution, you can always hardwire them or use the pass-through version as a temporary solution until the direct mount is available. And then as far as networking goes for the E100, as I mentioned, the E100 is a non-networked overload solution. So if you recall, the E1 Plus actually did offer a sidecar networking component for that. However, we learned that it was a very low volume component, so chose not to develop something similar for the E100. There is another project that Rockwell is working on that's referred to as subnet, where we're going to look at bringing other non-intelligent components onto a network. And there's some discussion and some thoughts around having the E100 be part of that particular program. However, that particular program is out a ways in probably 2022 and 2023. So. And then just some supporting links here, again, very similar to what I just mentioned of the documentation that's on ab.com. A lot of different literature available for the E100. And I will switch gears now over to the E200 overload relay that we talked about. So if we look at the E2, let me make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So again, very similar. If you look at that tiered overload product strategy on where the E200 sits, kind of that middle of the road in the performance class of electronic overload offering, but just a step above the E100. But again, a non-networked overload solution. So we got the feature comparison, very similar to what I showed already for the E100. So I'm going to skip past that. So let's look at some of the features and benefits of the E200. So again, another lower cost alternative to the actual higher end E300 for standalone non-networked motor protection applications. So the E200 is the image all the way to the right. There you can see there is a universal serial bus or USB type B interface port that you can connect to check the device, configure the device, but then once you're done commissioning and configuring the device, you would then unplug and the device will continue to locally protect from an overload perspective. One nice thing about the E200 is that it is configurable with one of Rockwell's free software interface packages called Connected Component Workbench, or CCW. So that the E200 works with software version 11 or newer. Actually works a little bit nicer in version 12 if you're familiar with that layout. So what's nice about CCW is that it is, like I said, it's a free utility that is somewhat similar to Studio 5000, however, not quite as costly. So it provides a much more elegant interface of configuration and monitoring of the device. So something to keep in mind that the E200 does support that feature. If you're not looking to configure the device with a computer or with CCW, the device can also be configured locally by the front of the device itself. So you can see on there you have 3 rotary dials, which is used to set the full load amps of the overload. And then you have an 8 position dip switch available there as well that you can see for trip class and feature selection, so you can either enable or disable things there. So again, no need to actually use software or a computer to configure this device. You can do it all from the front of the device itself. And then you can see just some images there from Connected Component Workbench. And then if you're familiar with the communication modules of the E300, there are now 3 of them versus just a single one, which when the E300 first launched was Ethernet only, but now offers Ethernet, DeviceNet, and this new USB communication module as well. If we look at some target applications for the E200, you might ask yourself, where could I use this particular component that doesn't have a network? So if you think of remote pumping stations or isolated HVAC installations on the roof of a building, things that don't generally have like a network infrastructure running to them because It's usually a lower cost investment for that, so you don't need that advanced interconnectivity. This is where I think the E200 really fits in. You can think of it too as portable equipment. So temporary motor control for, say, construction equipment or hydraulics or something that's being used to construct a building or install a piece of equipment, and they want some temporary protection to protect that equipment as well. The E200 might be a fit there. If you're familiar with Rockwell Automation's MCC offering in the form of IntelliCenter, they also offer a version of their MCC that is non-IntelliCenter, meaning it's non-networked. So this could be another good application for a non-networked overload to be part of that infrastructure. So I will talk a little bit about the E300 coming up, but something to keep in mind for the E200 is that you're able to leverage the same intelligent motor control, diagnostics, and modularity just without that networking capability. If we look at the documentation available for the E200 as well, you can see very similar to what I just showed for the E100. You have tech data, installation instructions, and a user manual, all available on the literature library on ab.com. These are just some screen captures from Connected Component Workbench, just showing you, again, a better layout of how the information is presented from the E300, E200 component, just giving you access to all the different protection features and the different menus. You can configure the device, you can look at the trip history, just a wealth of array of information in there, and is presented in a very nice format within Connected Component Workbench. Again, for Proposal Works, the E200 is set as a separate overload as compared to the others that we showed in there. So you have now the E100, E200, and E300 available in Proposal Works as well, if you're familiar with that particular interface. And then as far as web content goes, the E300 and E200 content all have its own dedicated web page again. But because the E200 is part of the portfolio of the E300, it's combined now with the E300 in there. So that's why you'll see kind of an E300 with a /E200 on there. But all the information that I'm going to talk about here and just talked about on the previous slides there is available on ab.com today. So that's pretty much it for the E200. Not very much to talk about again because of its non-networking capabilities. So now if we shift gears here and talk about the most premium offering, or the architecture class overload, the E300. Oh, let me make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Again, the same tiered overload product strategy that we see. So now we're at the premium level electronic overload. So the E300, which offers Ethernet IP and DeviceNet connectivity options. Here's the same feature comparison. So I'm going to skip over that. So again, as the most advanced electronic overload that Rockwell offers, the E300 can offer you intelligent motor control with native Ethernet IP and DeviceNet connectivity for easy commissioning, control, and monitoring, and interconnectivity with your control system, being that of a PLC or a DCS. We'll talk a little bit about the configuration of the E300 in terms of its scalable solution. So the E300 offers a very modular design, and you'll see what I mean by that when I get into the description of the modularity. And then one of the other nice things about the E300 is the access to diagnostic information. So if something happens with the application, the E300 is able to log all that information and present that information to you so that you're able to troubleshoot and figure out what the actual problem is so you can go and fix it. So there's a lot of powerful information there that really gives access for customers to do simultaneous real-time control, configuration, and data acquisition that you can then log in your historian or your PLC system. So the E300 is comprised of 3 different types of modules. We have at the top, which you've seen on the 2 previous presentations, the communication module, offered in the form of Ethernet IP, DeviceNet, or the E200 with that USB connection. Then in the middle, you have the control module, which is essentially the brains of the operation and where all the parameters and the microprocessor of the overload component sits itself. So you also have access to all the different I/O and where you do all your wiring to the device itself as the control your control wiring essentially too. So you'll notice too that one nice thing about that middle module also offers removable terminal blocks. So in the event that the customer experiences a failure with this particular overload and requires replacement, when you go to replace the component, you don't have to unwire everything. You can just remove those terminal blocks, put your new component in, and reconnect, and you're off and running again. And then at the bottom, you have the sensing module, which essentially connects to the power system bus and actually does the monitoring of the amps and the voltage and things like that of your protection application. So very similar to what we talked about with the E100, you have options for direct connect with IEC or NEMA style contactors, and then access to the same type of pass-through design that I talked about with the E100. If you take a look at the image on the right, you'll see with these modular connections that these components snap together with a toolless design. So each of these modules has a locking tab so that when you connect the modules together, you simply push the locking tab in and the configuration locks itself together. So a very easy commissioning and installation process from that perspective. What's nice about this modular configuration, and I'll talk about the different control module and sensing module selections, is that you can really pick and choose the combination of modules you need to really fit your application. So by offering it more modular, you have many different configurations and things to fit all different kinds of motor protection applications. And one other thing I'll draw your attention to is because of the advanced design of the E300, it also offers what's referred to as pre-configured operating modes. So 54, and you heard that right, 54 pre-configured operating modes. So if you know that the application is going to be using, say, a 2-speed starter or non-reversing starter or reversing starter type application, and these are just naming a few examples, there's many more than that, you can actually put the E300 into one of those modes, and it will pre-configure itself in the most basic and common type of configuration so that you don't have to go through and program each of the individual parameters manually. So it's kind of like an express programming if you're familiar with programming a frequency drive. So something very nice there to keep in mind. So if we look at the different sensing modules that are offered with the E300, consist of 3 different styles. You can select from just monitoring current. Then as you move up in features and functionality, you can select from current and ground fault monitoring. And then the third style, which is the most feature rich, is the voltage, current, and ground fault. And now that you're monitoring voltage and current, you can start to get ascertain energy and power data from the E300 as well. So if you're interested in seeing how much power your application is consuming, and it might depend on the different power rates that your utility is charging, that might be something of use with the E300 so that you can run your application at the most optimal times to save money. And then there are 4 different current ranges that the E300 supports: 0.5 to 30 amps, 6 to 60, 10 to 100, and then 20 to 200. And then above 200 amps, again, very similar to what I mentioned with the E100, you can use external CT configurations with the E300 all the way up to 65,000 amps. So very versatile, very expandable in terms of the wide range that the E300 can support. And then you'll see some of these images here, just of some different configurations of direct mounting with the different types of contactors that Rockwell Automation also offers. The image on the very bottom right-hand side, you can see that's a sample of the pass-through version there. So you can see those 3 openings is where you would just simply pass your wires through for that particular example there for 200 amp sensing style module. If we look now back at the middle module or the control module, again, this is where all your I/O resides and the different parameter and configurations in those pre-configured modes within the microprocessor. So I'm not going to go through and read all the different, but you can see the different I/O options there in terms of what I/O you might need for your application. So definitely a wide array there. And then also different control voltage options as well. So basically in the flavors of 24 volt DC, 120 volts AC, 120 volts AC, and 240 volts AC. So a number of different selections there. You also have the option to do ground fault protection with the control module as well. which would be done with a core balanced CT. So if you need ground fault protection that's has a little bit higher resolution than what the sensing module can offer, you could also have the option to do ground fault protection with the control module here as one of the optional features and functionality. One of the things we mentioned was, the CCW interface for the E200. One of the really nice things about the E300 is that it also does not require any software. So once you configure the device, if you're using the Ethernet IP module, once you configure your IP address, you can simply open up a web browser, so Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, Firefox, and type in that IP address, and then that brings up an embedded web browser. So all you need then is that web browser, and you can configure the device, monitor the device, and look at all the different trip histories and things of that nature. So again, you can do everything you need to with the E300 without software. However, as I'll talk about here coming up, you can use Rockwell software to integrate with this device as well if you're using that type of control system. So, and then as I mentioned, that third module, with being the communication module that sits on the top of the E300 stack, the three different flavors there, Ethernet IP, DeviceNet, and then the E200. I won't go into too much detail on these because we've already kind of talked about this at great length. One thing to note, though, is that the E300, to use it in its full form, does require at least one of every module. So you need at least one sensing module, at least one control module, and at least one communication module. So if we look a little bit closer at some of the expansion modules that are offered with the E300, again, very powerful and a very versatile offering for the E300. So you saw some of the native I/O options that the control module supports. But let's say your application requires some additional thermal monitoring or maybe some vibration monitoring, and you don't have enough I/O to do that with the E300. You can actually build out the E300 and add expansion I/O to that device and actually make this kind of a remote I/O rack. So instead of having to add additional components like remote I/O, you can actually add this to the E300 instead and bring all that information in through the E300 and have access through it to that web browser or through your PLC system as well. So something to keep in mind there. That's very, very powerful for the E300. And you can add up to 4 digital I/O modules and 4 analog modules. So the digital I/O modules, again, that's the same 3 flavors of different control voltages, 120, 240, and 24 volt DC. And then the analog I/O modules, which support just a wide array of the different analog options that you could bring into these modules. So 0 to 10 volt DC, 0 to 20, 4 to 20, RTD sensors, PTC, things of that nature. Now the E300 will support up to 1 digital I/O expansion module, but beyond that, you would need an additional power supply to really build out. If you're going to do, 4 I/O modules and 4 digital modules and 4 analog modules, you're going to need a supplemental power supply to power all those additional modules because the E300 itself doesn't have enough power to do that. And then down at the right-hand side, another nice element for the E300 is what's referred to as either a control station or a diagnostic station. The control station just has a series of buttons and a reset that you can control the device, whereas the diagnostic station actually adds a small LCD display, so you can actually scroll through some of the parameters and see how the E300 is operating and what it's monitoring and things of that nature. So again, if the application calls for being able to reset the device without having to open the enclosure door or the MCC door, this is a nice alternative to do that, where you can mount this through the use of a standard 22 millimeter cutout right on the front of the door, so you don't have to be accessing the components and worry about arc flash hazards and things of that nature. So the other nice thing about the E300 with the diagnostic station or control station is that once you have the E300 configured, you can do what's called a copycat procedure. So through the series of a couple of different buttons within the device itself, we'll grab a snapshot of all the parameters of the E300 and store that right in that little handheld device. So that in the event the device requires replacement, you can simply write those parameters back to the device and you're off and running again. The other nice thing that I've gotten good feedback on is that if you're deploying this in an application that has very similar E300 configurations, once you configure the first one, you can then copy that to the other devices and save some time again in the installation and commissioning process. As I mentioned, for the external CT configurations, the E300 does have its own set of external CTs that you can leverage that are certified to either UL or CE standards. And you can see on the bottom, the image on the bottom left there, there's an example image of a connection diagram of how you would deploy this in an external CT fashion. These are just some offerings that are offered alongside the E300. You can use additional CTs or third-party CTs as long as you are mindful of that 5 amp secondary on the current ratio there. So, but again, if you're looking to get everything from Rockwell, there is an offering here that is supported. I mentioned the Ethernet IP web browser. So the Ethernet communication module offers 2 Ethernet ports supporting network topologies of either star, linear, or device level ring. And then you can see a couple of different images here. One on the right there is the embedded web server that gives you access to all the parameters of the E300. And then there's another nice feature there you can see on the left-hand side there that you can actually configure. It supports SMTP messaging. So in the event the E300 has a trip or warning, you can actually have it configured to send an email to, say, your maintenance person to alert them that something has tripped with that particular component. So very nice feature there that you can get instant access and instant alert to something happening within your application there. And then if you're familiar with Rockwell's other Ethernet components that support a feature called automatic device configuration, that is also supported by the E300. So what automatic device configuration is once you have a device configured and connected to a Rockwell PLC, the PLC will take care of archiving those parameters for the device, and that in the event the device needs replacement, once you replace the device and set the IP address to the same device that you just replaced, the controller will take care of writing those parameters to the component itself. So that's why it's called automatic device configuration. So it works with drives, static switches, and a number of other different PLC type communication accessories as well. If you're familiar with HMIs, the E300 also has its own dedicated set of pre-configured faceplate objects that are available from ab.com. So these types of faceplate objects are actually specifically designed only for the E300. So what's nice about it is if you have an operator display maybe at the machine or in a control room somewhere and you're looking to mimic what the E300 is doing, this is a good tool to be able to use that in that particular fashion if you're familiar with the software FactoryTalk View. So again, gives you access to device status and maintenance control, the different I/O points. You can even look at the trending of the full load amps that the E300 is monitoring, the voltage and the power and everything. And then some of those diagnostics that I mentioned, if there's a trip event, you can actually see the different things there for that too. So that's pretty much it for the E300. Again, all the supporting information is available on ab.com. In addition, because the E300 has been out for some time now, as compared to the other previous products I just talked about, there's also a number of different demonstration videos on YouTube. So you can actually go to youtube.com and search for E300 and find some different pieces of literature there as well. So with that, that is my spiel on Rockwell's overload offering.
Bruce, thank you very much for your time. Guys, if you have any doubt, please email me or Alejandra. I'm putting my email on the chat. Si tenemos alguna duda, nos pueden escribir al correo. Very much thank you, Bruce. Veronica, we can continue.
Thank you, Bruce, for your support in this activity. Vamos a empezar con Abel. Abel, ¿estás por ahí?
Yep, thank you for having me.
Aquí estamos.
Ok, vamos a seguir con Abel de Hoffman, quien es la persona encargada para el territorio del Caribe y nos atiende de parte de Hoffman. Creo que algunos ya lo conocen. Vamos a empezar con tu presentación, que estamos un poquito retrasaditos, pero disculpen.
No te preocupes, vamos a tratar de acortar el tiempo. Muy buenos días a todos, gracias por estar aquí en la presentación en conjunto con el equipo de Warren y Rockwell, y la intención de esta plática también es hablarle un poquito de la parte de climatización de gabinetes. Trataremos de resumir un poquito la parte de la agenda por temas de tiempo, sin embargo trataremos de tratar todos los temas. Vamos a ver un pequeño videito que está por aquí.
¿Por qué climatizar? La correcta climatización de sistemas eléctricos y equipos es parte fundamental de su mantenimiento para garantizar su operación. Los efectos negativos por altas temperaturas y una inadecuada climatización pueden provocar la pérdida de garantías, pérdida del sistema y equipo eléctrico, pero lo más costoso son las pérdidas por paros operativos, que ascienden a millones de dólares en algunos casos. En gabinetes no climatizados, el calor es generado por componentes internos y es intensificado por fuentes externas. Esto puede influir seriamente en el rendimiento del equipo.
Bueno, como pueden observar, muchas de las consecuencias de la parte de una incorrecta climatización de gabinetes se debe más que nada a la parte de condiciones extremas de temperatura y también a la parte de los ambientes difíciles en las plantas, lo que puede conducir a riesgos altos. Nos hemos dado cuenta en la industria que la mayoría de los equipos pierden su vida útil hasta un 50% centígrado por cada incremento de temperatura de alrededor de 10 grados centígrados. Estos son unos ejemplos que hemos encontrado en la parte de malas prácticas de climatización. Hemos recorrido muchas plantas y hemos encontrado que hay una climatización adecuada, que hay muchos equipos que se llegan a sobrecalentar y no se dan cuenta los usuarios, y también encontramos que hay equipos que no están funcionando en las plantas. Pero también hay otras condiciones que pueden ser como la humedad y la corrosión por temas de filtración y de condiciones de cuestiones salinas, pero también por temas de falta de mantenimiento. Seguramente habrán visto cualquiera de estos temas en alguno de estos lugares o en alguna de estas plantas que normalmente trabajamos. Sin embargo, no nada más son las condiciones en el ambiente, sino también diferentes tipos de industrias tienen condiciones adversas que pueden poder llegar a tener una situación complicada, principalmente las metalúrgicas o las fábricas de tejidos. Incluso también las fábricas cementeras pueden llegar a tener condiciones inadecuadas. Y no se diga también de la parte de la industria de alimentos o la industria farmacéutica, que pueden llegar a tener condiciones adversas. A lo que nos da la pregunta de cómo resolver los problemas. A veces somos muy creativos o muy innovadores. Lo que no sabemos es si es la mejor forma de resolver las cosas. Lo que estamos viendo en esta imagen es que alguien tenía un problema y trató de resolverlo de alguna situación o de alguna forma característica. Lo que podemos darnos cuenta es que no es la mejor solución. Por ejemplo, del lado derecho podemos ver un gabinete de control al cual le pusieron un aire de estos que instalamos para ambientar los cuartos y los cuales generan humedad. Entonces no es la mejor solución para usar este tipo de equipos. Voy a pasarles otro videito que habla de la parte de las fuentes de calor y seguramente les va a servir. Bueno, independientemente de las condiciones externas, también hay condiciones internas que pueden llegar a generar calor adentro de un gabinete. En el video pudieron observar algunas condiciones externas. Ahora lo que podemos observar es qué genera calor adentro de los gabinetes o de los tableros industriales. Seguramente sabrán que el mayor generador de calor dentro de un tablero de control son los variadores de frecuencia. Sin embargo, los servomotores, los transformadores y los inversores de corriente pueden llegar a ser componentes que van a generar cantidad de calor y queda atrapado dentro del gabinete, lo cual nos puede generar un estrés en los equipos. Pero no es la única condición en temas de climatización que podemos enfrentar. Seguramente en algunas condiciones habrán podido observar que más en la parte del Caribe tenemos condiciones de humedad por las altas cantidades de humedad que se llegan a generar por las temporadas de lluvia. Y todos estos también aunados a componentes químicos y también a cuestiones de algunos sistemas de lavado que usan en algunas industrias, generan un choque térmico y lo cual genera humedad adentro de los gabinetes. También hay que tener un control específico sobre estas situaciones. Hemos visto que por cada 18 grados Fahrenheit también incrementa decrementa la vida útil de los componentes. Lo que nos podemos dar cuenta es que por cada etapa de cada 18 grados Fahrenheit, nos damos cuenta que va decrementando hasta un 50% la vida útil de los componentes. Sin embargo, también esto se dio cuando los procesadores incrementaron su capacidad de velocidad de procesamiento. A más velocidad también se genera más calor. Hay un personaje que se denominó como la ley de Moore, que es el doctor Gordon Moore de la compañía Intel, el cual él especificó que cada 18 o 24 meses iba a haber un nuevo procesador que iba a ir incrementando o duplicando su capacidad de procesamiento. Creo que se quedó corto porque a final de cuentas cada año vamos estrenando un nuevo teléfono con nuevos componentes y con mayor capacidad de velocidad y también, por supuesto, genera más calor. Asimismo, los procesadores para cuestiones industriales de la misma manera se van desarrollando más rápido. Sin embargo, como la tendencia genera y apunta más calor, podemos darnos cuenta que podemos llegar a tener consecuencias en la planta. Podemos darnos cuenta que por una cuestión de calor podemos llegar a tener paros operativos. Este tipo de paros operativos nos puede generar pérdidas de hasta $500,000 por hora en cuestiones de horas hombre o incluso en cuestiones de falta de producción, lo cual le afecta importantemente a la industria. Aquí podemos ver una tablita de costo de paro operativo por cada tipo de industria que hay en cada uno de los sectores y nos vamos a dar cuenta, dependiendo de la industria, cuál es la pérdida que puede llegar a tener por cada una de estas situaciones. Ahora, ¿cómo podemos resolverlo? Hay muchas formas básicas de enfriar gabinetes industriales. Tenemos 3 tipos globales o generales de los cuales vamos a platicar, que son la parte de climatización con aire fresco, climatización de gabinete sellado y la climatización conductiva. La parte de climatización de aire fresco depende de las condiciones específicas que hay adentro de un lugar y que podemos aprovechar para poder ingresar ese aire fresco que está en el ambiente dentro de una planta y poderlo ingresar al gabinete. Sin embargo, los climas lluviosos o los climas nevados no son condiciones óptimas para poder ingresar este tipo de situaciones. ¿Qué hacemos? Es aprovechar, climatizar por medio de abanicos, los cuales vamos a ingresar el aire fresco que se encuentra en el ambiente y podemos buscar resolver este problema. Pueden funcionar de 2 maneras, inyectando el aire fresco y extrayendo el aire caliente. Si nos damos cuenta, aquí hay varios tipos de configuración de cómo podemos ocupar los ventiladores para poder hacer la ventilación por medio de aire fresco. Sin embargo, no es la única opción que podemos hacer y a veces, si no tenemos las condiciones adecuadas de temperaturas, podemos provocar en lugar de un beneficio, un problema. Además de las condiciones de qué tanta suciedad en el ambiente o contaminantes químicos puede haber, podemos llegar a tener esta situación. También tenemos la opción de tipos de climatización por medio de gabinetes sellados. Estos no combinan el aire del exterior con el aire del interior. El objetivo principal de estos componentes es mantener separadas las condiciones de climatización en 2 etapas. La primera es que la parte del gabinete no se debe de combinar con la parte del exterior. Entonces, aquí podemos ver en el diagrama cómo es la condición del calor y vemos al sistema de aire acondicionado que no combina el aire del exterior con el aire del interior. Si nos damos cuenta, el aire de flujo interno, hay una recirculación de aire, lo cual está pasando por un medio de un sistema de enfriamiento, y en el aire de exterior usamos para enfriar los componentes externos y no combinamos el aire de ninguno de los dos casos. La ventaja de estos dispositivos es que tenemos equipos que operan desde 24 y 48 volts en corriente directa y desde 115 hasta 460 volts en corriente alterna. Tenemos capacidades de enfriamiento desde 200 hasta 60,000 BTUs. Y tienen aplicaciones diversas para uso interior, para uso exterior, para ambientes corrosivos, y los que tengan el interés de hacer la conexión con equipos de monitoreo remoto, podemos hacer protocolos de comunicación de estos sistemas con sistemas de PLCs por medio de protocolos de comunicación diversos. Aquí están las familias y no vamos a hablar de cada una de ellas por el tema del tiempo. Sin embargo, tenemos varias familias para distintos ambientes y nos podemos dar cuenta que podemos cubrir la alta gama de climatización en la parte de aires acondicionados industriales. Sin embargo, no es la única opción. También tenemos otras opciones que trabajan de manera distinta. Este sistema de enfriamiento se llama enfriador termoeléctrico. Este trabaja por medio de un efecto Peltier. Las placas Peltier lo que hacen es que son sistemas semiconductores, los cuales al momento de energizarse, de un lado se ponen calientes y de un lado se ponen frío. Nosotros aprovechamos ese principio para desarrollar el sistema de enfriador termoeléctrico. Lo que hacemos con este dispositivo es colocar el sistema del lado que la parte fría se queda en la parte interna y la parte del sistema de aire caliente se queda del lado externo. Entonces, nosotros al momento de que energizamos las placas y el aire se está enfriando, por medio de un ventilador impulsamos a toda la parte interna del gabinete el sistema de enfriamiento. Aquí vemos una aplicación de algunas de las que hemos trabajado y vemos cómo son muy eficientes también para trabajar en el ambiente exterior. La ventaja de estos equipos es que no necesitan mucho mantenimiento. Algunas de las condiciones que podríamos ver es que trabajan a 24 y 48 volts, con una capacidad de enfriamiento desde el 168 hasta 600 BTUs. Con grados de protección desde NEMA 12 hasta NEMA 4X con un grado de protección en tipo europeo y P65. Tenemos otro sistema de enfriamiento que se llama enfriamiento Vortex. ¿Por qué no aprovechar el aire comprimido que a veces ocupamos para limpiar los gabinetes y lo tenemos y lo ocupamos para poder hacer un sistema de enfriamiento? En lugar de estar sopleteando los ventiladores o los filtros, podemos usar el sistema de aire comprimido e inyectarlo adentro del gabinete. ¿Cómo se hace esto? Por medio de un sistema de Vortex, el cual toma el aire comprimido e ingresa el aire frío por medio de una microturbina y por medio de la misma microturbina saca el aire caliente del gabinete. Esto es similar a un tema de un torbellino, de un tornado, el cual en la parte interna se genera el aire frío, que es el que vamos a ingresar, y el aire caliente que sube lo sacamos fuera del gabinete. Este aire o esta turbinita gira hasta 1.000.000 de revoluciones por minuto y genera este tipo de turbulencia. Y aquí podemos observar cómo puede funcionar la parte del ingreso del aire frío y la salida del aire caliente. Este flujo de aire es inyectado al interior del gabinete y lo que podemos observar es que tenemos varios modelos que podemos ocupar dentro de la parte del sistema de enfriamiento, desde 400 BTUs hasta 5,000 BTUs. Estos no usan voltaje, son sistemas completamente mecánicos y tenemos la ventaja de que no podemos tener. Aquí tenemos el resumen de la parte de las soluciones que hemos platicado, de aires acondicionados, y por temas del tiempo ya no me voy a meter a tanto del resumen. quiero darles las gracias por habernos atendido y no sé si le paso la voz a Verónica y a Miguel para que puedan dar el fin o a la sesión de preguntas y respuestas.
Muchas gracias, Abel. Bueno, no sé si tienen algunas preguntas o comentarios que quieran hacer. Les agradecemos a todos por haber participado, haber estado a esta hora con nosotros. No sé, dejo abierto si alguien tiene alguna pregunta o estamos todos set. Igual, si tienen dudas o quieren más información sobre alguno de los temas que se trataron, podemos trabajarlo o pueden contactar a sus representantes de ventas o pueden escribirnos sobre el chat. Les vamos a dejar los contactos míos, que Verónica Berrocal, que estoy en Warren, o de Abel, si quieren dirigirse directamente a él, y también pueden contactarlo. Muchísimas gracias a todos por participar.